My favorite play is called Oh My Sweet Land. It's a one-woman show by Palestinian playwright Amir Nizar Zouavi, based on interviews he conducted with Syrian refugees living in Jordanian camps during the Civil War, which is still going on. In the first part of the show, the protagonist recounts the affair she had with a married man from her father's country, how they met at a local coffee shop and started looking for each other there, how one night he took her for a walk and at the end she blurted out an invitation for lunch the next day, how 4 months later she woke up to find that he wasn't there anymore. He'd gone back to Syria, back into a war zone to help his friend get out. She spends the rest of the show telling the stories of the things she saw and the people she met when she went back in after him. When I saw Oh My Sweet Land in New York City at the end of 2017, it was being produced by the Play Company and directed by the playwright himself. Me and 20 other nerds sat asses to elbows in a production kitchen at LaGuardia Community College for 90 minutes, no intermission, of the incredible Nadine Malouf telling the stories of children left permanently scarred by mortars and airstrikes, and of people faking their own deaths to evade capture, only to show up at their own funerals and get disappointed by the turnout. Each story was told in first person, and Nadine flowed from one character to another like sand through an hourglass. We got to watch as her character was drawn into Syria, as inevitably as she was drawn to Ashraf first. She goes to Lebanon, then to Jordan, before she finally has no choice but to set foot in Syria, the place she's tried so hard not to think about for most of her life. And all the while, she's cooking right there in front of you, 4 feet in front of you, this dish called kibbeh, mincemeat croquettes, which you'll find in a lot of Arab-speaking countries. It was the first thing she made for Ashraf the first day he came over, the day after the night when he took her for a walk and told her about his own stint in Bashar al-Assad's prisons. And in a panic, in a rush to comfort him, she offered to make him lunch. Halfway through Oh My Sweet Land, you will begin to worry about the onions. You have heard them sizzle in the pan, seen the steam rise up, smelled the sweet, savory aroma. This man's imprisonment matters so much more than a pan of onions, but you are sitting in a cream-colored Brooklyn kitchen, and the stove is a lot closer to you than Syria. So it's the onions that really trouble you, because surely the steam has turned to smoke. Surely they are burning. Oh My Sweet Land is about how we look away from tragedies, how we distract ourselves from all the suffering in the world. But it too makes use of distractions, albeit for more benevolent purposes. Don't get me wrong, it is a very scary thing to sit inches away from someone while they're hacking meat and shouting like an angry soldier. But at the same time, the rhythm of a blade on a butcher's block and of onions frying in a pan was really palliative for me. Maybe it's just because I'm a sucker for kitchen foley, like Stir Fry by Migos is ASMR for me. But those sounds, that food, mesmerized me and made the horror stories much easier to listen to. They were like a pinch on my thigh to distract me from the needle in my arm. Didn't make the shot any duller, but I was more prepared to feel it. I've thought about this play a lot over the last few years. Like, I remember coming back the night I saw it and gushing to a friend about it. I said something like, whatever that was, is what I want to be doing. Persona 5 is the most recent main series game in Atlus's long-running Persona series, which itself is a spin-off of the even longer-running Shin Megami Tensei series. 5 came out in 2016, but I didn't actually play it for the first time until winter 2019, when I finally caved and bought myself a PS4. What I ended up finding was an incredibly stylish JRPG with fantastic music and a whole lot of character, just so many characters. You play as this kid, a second-year high school student who's just transferred to Shujin Academy in Tokyo after getting into some trouble in his hometown. On his very first day of school, he stumbles into a world parallel to our own, where the distorted desires of society's greatest sadists coalesce into twisted palaces where their innermost selves can live out their dark fantasies. It's a lot. Each of these palaces is populated by shadows, manifestations of the dark sides of human cognition. They spring forth from our collective unconscious, like Athena from Zeus's skull, taking the forms of creatures from myths and folklore. You can collect these shadows and summon them to fight alongside you as your personas, or you can fuse the weaker ones together to create even more powerful ones, which you'll need to do in order to fight and sneak your way to the center of these palaces, where you'll steal away their rulers' dark desires and make them change their ways. Did you get all that?
Nope, not at all.
Monster collecting aside, Persona 5 is also a social simulator, and that's one of the things I like the most about it. So much of the game hinges on managing your time, using some of it for self-improvement, building your social stats, but using the majority of it to build your relationships with your confidants, your friends around town. To be fair, that relationship building mostly looks like answering texts to hang out, then once you meet up, scrolling through endless decision trees trying to figure out what exactly this person wants to hear, and then telling them that. It's a very clunky, clumsy, transactional imagining of the way that real relationships work. But it's also really fun. Despite, or maybe even because of, the inelegance of it all and the terrible, horrible, truly awful dialogue, you start really thinking about how to respond to everybody you meet. You start to genuinely wonder what this person most needs to hear in order to motivate them through their extremely limited character development. A significant portion of this game is about the practice of encouraging people, of bolstering their will to press on through hardship, whether that's trauma or abuse or their own mistakes. In return, you're empowered yourself. You unlock new skills and more powerful personas the more confidants you add to your party. The fact that Persona 5 recognizes that truth, that we get stronger the more we strengthen other people, and engages the player in the practice of doing that as a condition of winning the game, is really beautiful to me. It doesn't make up for its horrible plotting and dialogue, or for its paper-thin characters, or for its non-existent female characters and their uniform objectification, or for the fact that I can't romance Dr. Maruki, but it's something.
What the... Why's the wind salty?
Sorry.
I started playing Persona 5 a few weeks after getting fired from my job at a local cafe, which is a story for another time. Weirdly enough, I found that the social elements of the game filled a gap in my life, satisfied the part of me that really missed talking to customers. I was missing having regulars who would come in and tell me about their day and tell me about everything they'd been thinking about since the last time we saw each other, who counted on me for some insight, or at least some sympathy and a pick-me-up. I missed being people's over-the-counter therapist, so to speak. Persona 5 was that part of restaurant work, and of being a person in the social world, gamified. It's easy to imagine who else this game might have been made for, partly because a representation of the intended audience seems to have been included in the story. The emotional core of the game hinges on a character who is Hikiko Mori.
What is going on, Kaz?
Oh, nothing. It seems the girls have gone hikikomori inside the classroom.
Christ! Hikikomori!
Which basically means someone who's withdrawn from social life to an unhealthy degree. A 2018 survey by the Japanese government estimated that there are more than 1 million people between the ages of 15 and 64 in that country, living in some degree of social withdrawal. Many don't have jobs or can't retain employment. Many don't leave their own homes and rely on the internet for social engagement and their family members for their food and care. In Persona 5, it's only thanks to the careful and sustained attention of you and the other Phantom Thieves, and a trip to the game's best palace bar none, that the Hikiko Mori character starts to reintegrate.
Sidebar. This palace is probably my favorite location in Persona 5. It has the best music and some of the game's most successful emotional beats, And the combat completely subverts the way you've learned to fight up to this point in the game. The shadows here punish you severely for reaching for your magical abilities, which by now you've learned are the most effective way for you to knock down enemies and set up your all-out attack, which is your most powerful move. Here, the enemies all have magical resistances which repel your spells back at you. So you end up having to rely a lot more on your physical skills, which use hit points instead of skill points. At the same time, all of the safe rooms and healing items are way more spread out than you're used to them being. The effect is that you end up feeling anxious and stressed out the whole time you're in the palace, always worried about what's going to happen when you walk into the next room, which echoes perfectly what's going on in the story at the time you're entering this palace. For the first and only time in the whole game, someone has sought out you and the other Phantom Thieves to change their heart, not somebody else's. The shut-in character is traumatized and depressed and scared, and she wants help. That's why she called you. But at the same time, she's still trapped inside of her old bad coping mechanism. She's still literally and metaphorically locked in her room. She's invited you in, but inside is still a hostile environment, and things aren't going to get easier for her or for you until she finds some way to fight her way out of it. I think this is level design at its finest. It's what I mean when I say that I really love narratively motivated combat. Okay, sidebar over. Let's go back home. This is, without a doubt, the whitest part of my neighborhood.
Now, I'm not a shut-in, but the game did a similar thing for me, and I imagine for a lot of other socially anxious people. I started and finished the game in about 120 hours over 20 days last December. I was rushing to get it done before January, when I would be moving back to New York City for a month to act in a play. This is the play company right here. They do really weird stuff with noisy music. Go check them out. To be honest, I was terrified to go back. Almost 2 years after graduating from college, I was finally starting to feel like I was building a good life for myself here in Syracuse. I'd rekindled a bunch of old friendships, made some incredible new ones, and found a place for myself in the restaurant worker community here. It felt insane to be leaving all of that right when it was getting good to go back to a place where I'd never felt like I belonged, no matter how many friends I had. But then I started marathoning Persona 5, trying to beat it before I left so I wouldn't have to bring my PS4 with me. The more I played, the less the idea of reacquainting with old friends and making new ones frightened me. I was getting all this practice starting and sustaining relationships with perfect strangers in this anime dating sim. It was not the real thing by any stretch of the imagination, but it helped me build the confidence I needed to go back to the real thing. It even got me excited to do it, eager even, because now I would have Persona 5 to soundtrack my social life. A lot of digital ink has already been spilled about the music in Persona 5. I'm not going to add too much to that today, except to say that the Persona 5 original soundtrack is one of like 2 albums that I've purchased outright in recent memory that wasn't like a friend's indie release. The other was the soundtrack to Final Fantasy XIII, which we will talk about another day. The song you're hearing right now is called Sunset Bridge off the P5 OST, and it is genuinely one of the most heartwarming and inspiring things I've ever heard. You hear it on 4 occasions in the game. 1, when you change someone's heart in Mementos, which is the seemingly bottomless palace that represents all of our dark desires. 2, when you make a confidant bond of narrative importance. 3, when you max out your relationship level with a confidant. And 4, on your very last day in Tokyo when you're running around saying goodbye to all the friends you've made before moving back to your hometown. The song is a lot like a victory chime, but it's used way more sparingly than triumph.
Nice work, team!
Okay.
You only hear it in those moments when you've helped someone accomplish a goal, or reach closure, or make a breakthrough, when you've seen someone through to the end of their character arc. It's already a really nostalgic sounding tune, but the more people you meet, and the stronger your relationships with them become, the sadder it gets as you build more and more associations with it. This is the song that played in my head the last time I saw my friends before going back to New York. This is the song that I would play when I was feeling lonely. Sunset Bridge reminds me that even though my time with someone may be over, I'll never really lose them. I would also listen to the Persona 5 music when I was walking around outside and feeling sad. My favorite track for that purpose was probably the rainy day variant of the secondary theme of the game, Beneath the Mask. The original already has this yearning quality that empties out your insides. The version that plays when it rains takes this a step further by dropping the bass line and the kick and the snare from the mix, so the song isn't nearly as grounded as you're used to it being. Instead, those parts are replaced by the sound of a perpetual rain, which plays whether you're inside or out. The effect is that when it rains in Persona 5, you feel kind of homeless. You feel like there's nothing behind you to lean back on, like every warm, dry place has been denied to you. That's often how I feel when I'm in New York. When I'm in the city, even when I'm indoors, I feel like I'm wandering around outside, looking for some place to be. There's nowhere for me to sit and rest, nowhere for me to stand to get out of the rain. It's really hard not to get addicted to the atmosphere and simplicity of Persona 5, in the same way that it's hard to avoid the pitfalls of TikTok and Tinder. That soundtrack was basically the only thing I listened to for all of January, to the point that now, when I think about Chinatown, where my apartment was, I think about wandering around in the cold with that music playing. I even bought these red and black blunnies because they reminded me of Joker's color palette. Sponsor me, Blundstone. Always rep your brand. Persona smooths out all the complexities of being a person around other people. Self-improvement isn't as simple as running up your stats watching movies. Customer service isn't as simple as remembering everyone's orders. Dating isn't as easy as figuring out the right inputs to get the desired outputs. But the game makes it feel like it is. And if you spend too much time living in that reductive, frictionless world, you're never gonna learn that. Which is why I think it's so important that Persona forces you to leave. Like I said, at the end of the game, you have to say goodbye to all the friends you've made and go back to your hometown. It's like the game is saying that we have to leave too. We have to wake up, get out there, just like the theme song says. We have to let go of our comfort and return to the project of being real people in the real world. We can't stay in anime Tokyo for forever. We can't look away from the world forever. The framing device of Persona 5 is that the protagonist has just been caught by the police after a failed heist. You're not playing through the story, but recounting every calendar day of the last few months, confessing to every one of your crimes. You find this a lot in mysteries, going as far back as Sophocles' Oedipus Rex. The further you move forward in time, the more you learn about the past leading up to the start of the story. But remember, this is a social simulator, not a detective novel. The only crimes you've committed are attempted heart-changing and premeditated emotional growth. So it's kind of funny when Sai Nijima describes your friends as your accomplices and does so in such a sinister way.
Staging your crimes with calling cards. It's hard to believe that a student could manage this alone. An adult. For example, someone talented enough to move people with words. Perhaps they coached you.
Do you really want to receive my guidance?
It's hard to believe an ordinary high school student could accomplish such grandiose heists. One would need a heart of steel, unaffected by outside influences, and prepared to act without hesitating. There has to be someone who helped strengthen your mental state. Sound like somebody you know? Give me a name!
My name is Takuto Maruki. thank you for welcoming me to your school.
So you won't sell out your accomplice?
It's funny, but it's also the way that a lot of contemporary civil rights activists describe their friends, the people who stand in solidarity with them. They don't want allies, they want accomplices, people who will go down with them, people who understand themselves as equally yoked to their struggle. It's corny, but I like it, and my greatest aspiration is to open a restaurant with that ethos in mind. I want to open a spot like Cafe LeBlanc, Sojiro Sakura's place in Yongen-Jaya. I want it to be warm and inviting and to always smell like coffee beans. The kind of place where you want to come in and wait out the rain. A place where all my people can collect, can come see each other and me. Where I can miss them when they're gone, but rest assured knowing that they'll be back the next night. I want to go back to being the over-the-counter therapist. I want to stand behind a bar and toss my 2 cents into every conversation. At my restaurant, we won't shy away from the horrors of the world. In fact, we're going to bring them closer to us by talking about them over dinner, like in Oh My Sweet Land. I want to build the kind of place where we can hold the worst things in life in one hand and a glass of the best things in life in the other, in such a way that one doesn't sour or sugarcoat the other. We won't drink to forget our problems, but to mull over what we're going to do about them. I want to build a hideout where me and my accomplices can plot out our next mission over coffee and a plate of curry. A little world where we can rest up and think about how we're going to change the one outside our door.
Thank you so much for indulging me this week. I've been wanting to talk about this game and my restaurant idea for so long, so it's nice to get it all off my chest. If you want to support me in making this dream become real, head down to the link in the description and consider supporting me on Patreon. If you donate at $3 a month, you will also get your name inserted into a limerick that I will put at the end of a YouTube video. I'm going to start rolling those out starting next week when I start my October poetry project, Pumpkin Poems. Also in the description are a bunch of links to some stuff that's relevant to some of the stuff I talked about in the video today, including another Adam Neely video, I love Adam Neely, where he plays Persona 5 tunes with the J Music Ensemble in New York City. If you can make it through all of the jazz jargon, you'll get to this really amazing conversation with their band leader.
I feel like going down to that 7 and then coming back up to the E is like, all right, things gonna be all right. Yeah. You know that feeling? Yeah.
Where he talks about what is so inspiring about J-pop and JRPG and anime music. His name is Patrick Bartley Jr. and he's a genius. So even if you don't make it to the conversation, go listen to him play sax. You will not regret it, I promise. But anyway, that's it for me. Thanks for hanging out. I'll be back next week with something a little different.
Persona 5 is it's all show.